the day the eastern sky changed. They called it the Summer of Broken Eagles. By mid-1944, the Eastern Front had become a place where reputations of armies, commanders, and even entire air fleets were made or shattered in the space of a few days. And somewhere above the rolling wheat fields of Belarus and the crumbling towns of eastern Poland, a new sound began to echo in the sky. A sharper engine note, quicker, more urgent. A fighter with the wingspan of a bird of prey and the temperament of a street knife. It was the Yakovlev Yak-3. On paper, it looked almost too simple to be a threat. Too light, too small, too ordinary. Nothing like the broad-winged thunderbolts or the imposing silhouettes of the FW-190s that had terrorized Soviet skies since 1941. Yet those who flew against it, those who survived, would later describe the encounter the same way. Suddenly, it was just there. And suddenly, we were losing. This is the story of the day the Yak-3 outflew, outturned, and outthought some of Germany's most decorated aces, and why that moment mattered far more than a single air battle. By the summer of 1944, the Luftwaffe bore almost no resemblance to the fearsome formation that had roared across Europe 5 years earlier. The wide, confident sweeps of 1939 and 1940, when Bf-109s owned the sky and pilots spoke confidently of one pass, one kill, had been replaced with scattered, frantic defensive sorties. Fuel shortages were constant. Aircraft attrition was staggering. Veteran pilots were irreplaceable, and the Eastern Front, always brutal, had become a world of contradictions. The skies were empty 1 hour, the next choked with Soviet formations. The once formidable German logistical machine struggled under the weight of retreat, and above it all, the Luftwaffe's Jagdgeschwader, fighter wings that had once contained aces with 100, 150, even 200 victories, were now thinning shadows of themselves. Yet even in this desperate hour, Germany still had elite units. Among them were formations like JG-51 and JG-52, home to some of the highest-scoring pilots in aviation history. These men were not amateurs, nor were they broken remnants. Many were hardened Eastern Front specialists who had learned to fight in low-altitude turning battles, in freezing weather, in chaotic conditions that tested even the most disciplined aviators. They were the kind of pilots who could, in the right circumstances, still dominate the sky, and Soviet pilots knew it. For years, Soviet flyers had fought with what they had, machines that were rugged but often inferior, Yak-1s, Yak-7s, GG-3s, aircraft that performed adequately but struggled against the finesse of the Bf-109F or the brutal firepower of the later FW-190A models. Early in the war, some fighter regiments wrote reports so bleak they bordered on hopelessness, but the Soviets adapted. Factories shifted. Designs improved. Engineers worked around the clock under bombardment. And by 1943, the Yakovlev Bureau began producing a prototype that would quietly become the pinnacle of their low-altitude dogfighting philosophy, the Yak-3. The Yak-3 was not built for show. It was built for survival and superiority at the exact altitudes where the Eastern Front War was actually fought. Its designers stripped away every gram of unnecessary weight. They tightened the frame, improved the wing profile, and kept the center of gravity so precise that the aircraft felt like an extension of a pilot's hands. It wasn't the fastest fighter in the world. It wasn't the most heavily armed. It didn't climb like a Mustang or dive like a 190, but it turned and accelerated and reacted instantly. One test pilot simply wrote, "Finally, something that listens." If one group of pilots could expose the Yak-3's true potential, it was the men of the Normandie-Niémen regiment. These were French volunteers, free French pilots who had chosen to fight alongside the Soviet Air Force rather than in North Africa or Western Europe. By 1944, they were already legends on the Eastern Front. They had flown Yaks since their arrival, scored dozens of victories, and earned the respect of Soviet aces who were not easily impressed, and the Germans knew them well. Luftwaffe units operating in their sectors learned to recognize the French squadron markings and treated them with wary respect. The Normandy pilots were aggressive, disciplined, and, according to both Soviet and German accounts, unnervingly calm in high-stress engagements. When the French regiment received the Yak-3, their combat philosophy fused perfectly with the new aircraft's design. The Yak-3 rewarded instinct, aggression, and close-quarters maneuvering, all hallmarks of French flying style. Their mechanics said the aircraft looked fragile. Their pilots said it felt invincible. German intelligence had recorded sightings of a new Soviet fighter. Reports described a smaller Yak with better climb performance and a sharper silhouette. But the Luftwaffe had been seeing new Soviet models for years. Many were prototypes or region-specific upgrades. Most weren't game-changing. And then came the field reports. Small Yak. Turns extremely well. Cannot shake it at 3,000 meters. Beware at low altitude. At first, these warnings blended into the chaos of Eastern Front paperwork. But soon, a pattern emerged. German pilots were being outturned at altitudes they once considered their domain. Their 109 Gs, heavily upgraded with armor and new guns, had become heavier. Their 190 As, once unmatched in low-altitude power, were suffering from wear, maintenance issues, and fuel shortages. The Soviets, meanwhile, were receiving Yak-3s in greater numbers. One Luftwaffe officer would later write, "The issue was not that they had a better aircraft. The issue was that they had it now." The now famous encounter, the one remembered in Soviet, French, and German accounts, took place during the summer of 1944. Exact altitude estimates vary. Exact numbers differ slightly depending on the source. But the broad contours remain consistent across all credible historical records. A group of Normandie-Niémen Yak-3s encountered a formation of German F-109 Gs and FW-190 As. The Germans were veteran pilots. The Soviet-French group was smaller. The Germans initiated the engagement. Everything else became a whirlwind. This was not a staged showdown. It was a mission intersecting with another mission. Fighters climbing, circling, testing each other, then committing in a sudden, violent burst of energy. The kind of engagement that lasted minutes, but felt, to those involved, like hours. What followed would later be described by one French pilot as, not a battle, a demonstration. The environment favored the Yak-3. It was a hot day, low to mid-altitude. Visibility was excellent, and the Yak's Klimov engine thrived in these conditions. German aircraft, especially the Bf-109G variants, suffered from heavier weight and reduced turning performance compared to earlier models. The Bf-109G6 and G8, built for high-altitude interception and carrying extra armament, were not ideally suited for the twisting knife fight that unfolded. The Fu-190A, while powerful, had a wider turning radius and relied on slashing attacks rather than tight dogfighting. The Yak-3 turned inside both. This was not theory, it was physics, and the Germans knew it within seconds of the engagement. According to post-war interviews and Eastern Front pilot memoirs, the fight began when the German formation attempted a diving attack. It was a textbook tactic. Use altitude to gain momentum, strike fast, then climb away. But the Yak-3s reacted faster than expected. They cut into the attack angle. They bled speed quickly, then pivoted inside the German turns. Their tight turning circle caught the Germans mid-maneuver. Veteran Luftwaffe pilots, men with 50, 80, even 100 victories, found themselves fighting for positional advantage against aircraft that could simply outturn them at will. One German pilot described trying to shake a Yak-3. "I pushed the throttle and pulled. The Yak stayed on my wing as if tied there by rope." Another survivor recalled, "It did not dive like we did. It did not climb like we did. It just turned." The outcome of the battle was not solely due to the aircraft. The Normandie-Niémen pilots were already among the most skilled Allied flyers on the Eastern Front. Their discipline, communication, and instinct were all factors. They did not panic when the Germans opened the engagement. They did not lose cohesion. They fought as a unit, maintaining formation flexibility, a crucial advantage in a turning battle. The Yak-3 amplified their strengths. Its cockpit visibility allowed quicker reactions. Its roll rate allowed rapid repositioning. Its acceleration at low speed let pilots recover from tight maneuvers without stalling. In close-quarters combat, those seconds mattered. Meanwhile, the German formation, expecting a quick strike, found itself trapped in a prolonged turning engagement, the exact scenario that nullified their historical advantages. Within minutes, the sky became a mosaic of sharp banking tracers, twisting contrails, and sudden flashes of cannon fire. The outcome was decisive and humiliating. Historical accounts vary slightly regarding the exact tally, but all agree that the Yak-3s shot down multiple German aircraft. The German formation withdrew in disarray. The Soviet-French group suffered minimal losses, and in some accounts, none at all. Word spread quickly. Soviet pilots celebrated. French mechanics boasted. German officers, according to later interviews, were stunned. One Luftwaffe commander remarked, "They have a new fighter, and it is very, very good." For a force already weakened, this was a psychological blow. Not because the Yak-3 existed, but because it performed so well against experienced German aces. This was not a one-off skirmish. This was a preview of the future. After the engagement, German intelligence issued a more formal assessment. Avoid prolonged turning battles with new Yak models. Maintain altitude advantage whenever possible. Do not engage Yak-3s below 4,000 meters if avoidable. Expect rapid acceleration and tight maneuvering at low speed. The warning was clear. The threat was real. Yet there was an irony. The Yak-3 never existed in massive numbers. Production limitations, material shortages, and the late stage of the war meant that fewer than 5,000 were built, far below the tens of thousands of earlier Yak models. But it didn't need massive numbers. Its impact was symbolic. For years, German pilots had assumed technical superiority. The Yak-3 shattered that assumption. It showed that the Soviet aviation industry, once dismissed as primitive, had achieved parity, even superiority, in certain combat environments. And in a war where morale mattered almost as much as machinery, that shift echoed far beyond a single dogfight. End of Part 1. The day the Yak-3 outdueled Germany's top Luftwaffe aces was more than a tactical victory. It was a moment that revealed a dramatic reversal of air power on the Eastern Front. But the story of how this fighter was created, refined, and finally unleashed is just beginning.